1999, that ear-piercing shriek from a little pink dog named Courage could send shivers down our spines and leave us laughing. Fast forward to 2002, and Courage's scream sounded different. So what happened? Why didn't Courage scream like he used to? Today we're diving into the evolution of Courage the Cowardly Dog's iconic scream. Courage the Cowardly Dog wasn't your typical kids cartoon. Airing from 1999 to 2002, the series quickly gained a loyal fan base because it was scary yet funny, packed with charm and eccentric characters. Week after week, young viewers were treated to creepy creatures and paranormal perils in the middle of nowhere. But Courage stood out not just for its monsters, but for its emotional depth and unique style. This was a cartoon that could make you cover your eyes one minute and go awe the next. Creator John R. Dilworth drew inspiration from classic horror and sci-fi films, giving many episodes a genuine spooky edge. Courage faced ghostly apparitions, insane barbers, evil gods, and alien chickens. And some of these episodes truly terrified kids in the early 2000s. In fact, Courage often pushed into outright horror more than its Cartoon Network peers. And a huge part of why all this worked was the expressive voice acting, especially Marty Grabstein's performance as Courage. Unlike most cartoon protagonists, Courage didn't have long, witty monologues or constant one-liners. In fact, by design, he rarely spoke in full sentences at all. Instead, Marty Grabstein conveyed Courage's thoughts through frantic gibberish, hilarious yelps, and, of course, those iconic screams. He literally yapped and babbled in fear, and somehow, we always understood what Courage meant. This approach made Courage feel more like a real pet dog and a comedic actor at the same time. In interviews, Grabstein revealed that he grounded Courage's voice in a combination of paranoia and panic to keep the character's fear authentic. Listening to Courage, you truly believe this dog is nervously shaking 24/7, and yet he never gives up. That vocal performance sold the horror and humor hand in hand. Courage's scream was the defining sound of the show's early episodes. It was both over the top and strangely real in its terror. In the early seasons, Marty Grabstein really went all in on those vocals. The screams weren't just stock sound effects, you could tell Grabstein was in the booth belting out Courage's fear full force. The result? Some unforgettably raw moments that elevated both the horror and the comedy. Let's look at a couple of iconic examples from the first seasons. The famous episode King Ramses' Curse, Season 1, 2000. A ghostly Egyptian pharaoh haunts the Bag farmhouse, demanding Eustace return the slab. First time Courage lays eyes on King Ramses, he absolutely loses it. And honestly, I believe it's the amazing voice acting by Marty Grabstein that makes this episode so unforgettable. Later in the episode, as plagues descend, Courage's reactions swing wildly between terrified yelps and theatrics. He's screaming, flailing, trying to warn Muriel and stop Eustace from being his usual stubborn self. And every time he opens his mouth to let out another scream, it somehow gets funnier and more desperate. Throughout the first season, Courage's lungs were working overtime. Whether he was being chased by Cat's giant spiders in A Night at the Cat's Motel, or getting shocked by the naughty barber in Freaky Fred, his immediate reaction was often a crazy scream followed by frantic action. It became a running joke that Courage could scream at anything, a shadow, a monster, or even just Eustace's scary Ooga Booga mask, and make the audience jump and laugh simultaneously. Importantly, these screams never felt cheap. Marty Grabstein's performance was so committed that you felt the urgency and panic in Courage's voice. The poor dog sounded genuinely afraid for his life, which considering the villains on the show, he was. Fans who grew up with the early episodes often remember how intense Courage's scream used to be. It was almost cathartic. He was voicing the fear we might have felt as kids watching those creepy scenes, but doing it in such an exaggerated, cartoonish way that it released the tension through laughter. And it seemed like nothing could silence him, until gradually, things changed. By the time Courage the Cowardly Dog reached its later seasons, die-hard viewers started to notice that Courage wasn't screaming quite as loudly. Or as often as he did in the beginning. The show was still fantastic, but something about our hero's voice had evolved. So, when and how did this change happen? It turns out the shift started behind the scenes after Season 1. Originally, Courage actually talked a fair bit in early episodes. Not monologues, but he had more English dialogue. However, the network and producers decided that Courage was talking too much for their liking. They felt the character would be funnier and more iconic if he spoke less and relied more on expressive sounds. As a result, after the first season, Courage's understandable dialogue was drastically cut back. Marty Grabstein shifted to performing almost all of Courage's lines as gibberish, grunts, whimpers, and screams. Essentially, Courage became more laconic using his voice in non-verbal ways most of the time. At first, this change actually meant more screaming and goofy noises. Indeed, many fans loved that Courage's babbling and shrieking took center stage. It made the character even funnier and more expressive. The creative team also embraced it. They liked having Courage communicate through pure emotion rather than words. But as the series went on into its third and fourth seasons, the tone of the show and the way Courage's fear was portrayed changed. Later episodes often explored slightly different atmospheres than the early ones. Some stories were more surreal, and some were outright wacky in new ways. Correspondingly, Courage's trademark scream became less intense and less frequent in these contexts, used more strategically than as a constant reflex. Let's compare. In Season 1, Courage would shriek at the drop of a hat. Every monster appearance earned a full volume scream. By Seasons 3 and 4, Courage still gets scared, of course, but he might respond with a softer yell, a groan of dread, or an anxious stammer before going into a shorter scream. The screams he does make don't last as long as the early days, or they're pitched a bit differently, sometimes more of a high yip or a quick eep than a sustained howl. In a few instances, the animators even played with silent screams. The change is noticeable if you watch an early episode back-to-back with a later one. Consider Ball of Revenge, Season 4, a later episode where a bunch of past villains return for revenge. In one of the final scenes, Courage unleashes a scream so powerful that it literally blows the bad guys away, with a visual gag of the scream creating a hole in the floor. By this point, the show was self-aware about Courage's screaming ability. The focus wasn't on terrifying the audience with a shriek, it was about using it as a fun payoff to defeat the villains. Even the overall comedy style shifted slightly by later seasons, relying a bit less on Courage's personal freakouts and more on situational or visual gags. Episodes like Muriel Blows Up or Bride of the Swamp Monster had plenty of absurdity, but Courage's reactions were sometimes toned down into funny asides, or one-liners muttered under his breath, instead of always a giant scream. It's as if the show had matured and was confident enough to use Courage's scream sparingly for effect, rather than a constant punchline. Don't get me wrong, he still screamed in Season 4. He just did so a little less and in shorter bursts, and because of that, when he did belt one out, it stood out even more due to the contrast. So why the change? What could make Marty Grabstein dial it back on the mega screams? There's no single confirmed answer, but we can speculate on a few likely reasons based on interviews and context. As mentioned, the producers and Cartoon Network initially thought Courage should be less talkative and more expressive. This creative direction might have also included moderating his screams so they remained funny, not grating. They likely didn't want the gag to get overused to the point of losing impact. By using the scream more selectively in later seasons, it stayed special and didn't wear out its welcome. Also, it's possible the network was conscious of younger viewers. A constant blood-curdling scream might be too intense or even annoying if repeated every 2 minutes. Toning it down could be a way to keep parents happy and the tone balanced. Essentially, quality over quantity. A few well-placed screams can be funnier than dozens of repetitive ones. We can't forget that behind Courage's voice is a real human with vocal cords. Imagine screaming at the top of your lung in a recording booth, take after take, year after year. It's exhausting. Marty Grabstein hasn't outright stated that he could do the scream the same way, but it's reasonable to think that to preserve his voice, he might have adjusted the technique or intensity over time. Some voice actors have shared stories of sore throats and lost voices after intense sessions, and Courage had a lot of intense sessions. By 2002, perhaps Grabstein and the voice directors found a slightly more controlled way to get Courage's fear across without shredding his throat every episode. This could mean shorter screams or using more vocal fry instead of full volume shrieks each time. There's also a simpler reason. Comedy is all about timing and variation. If Courage had kept screaming in exactly the same way for 4 seasons straight, the audience might have gotten used to it. By tweaking his vocal antics, sometimes a falsetto scream, sometimes a groaning complaint, sometimes a silent, terrified expression, the show kept us on our toes. Finally, I should mention that Marty Grabstein himself has always been a team player about these choices. In various interviews and convention panels, he's expressed how much fun he had creating all of Courage's odd sounds, and how proud he is of the character's legacy. He continued voicing Courage in a 2014 special, The Fog of Courage, and a 2021 crossover movie, proving he's still got that trademark yelp in him. Fans who meet him at events often request the iconic scream, and Grabstein can still belt it out on cue, so the scream never truly died. It just changed a little during the show's original run. So yeah, Courage doesn't scream like he used to, but if you don't like this video, I just might. Hit that like button before King Ramsay shows up at your door chanting, "Return the slab," and subscribe, or I'll make you listen to Eustace play the sitar on loop.